It was one of those evenings when the sky seemed heavy, almost as if it carried the weight of the whole world. Rain poured in gentle sheets at first, tapping softly on the rooftops. Then slowly it grew heavier, drumming loudly against the streets. The man walked home from work, his coat pulled tight against the sudden chill, hands shoved deep into his pockets. He usually didn't mind rain much. Sometimes it was peaceful, almost comforting. Tonight, though, there was a strange emptiness that made him feel lonelier than usual. As he walked down the narrow street that cut through the quieter part of town, he noticed something small moving awkwardly in the distance. At first he thought it was just a plastic bag being tossed by the wind, but then it moved again, more deliberately, and in a way that suggested life. He squinted through the curtain of rain and realized it was a dog, soaked and shivering, trying to navigate its way across the wet pavement. Its fur was matted and dirty, eyes wide with fear, and it looked as though it hadn't eaten in days. For a moment he hesitated. He was not exactly a stranger to kindness, but he was cautious by nature. Approaching a scared stray in the dark was not always safe. People often warned him about animals, saying they could bite if frightened. Still, something about the dog's helplessness made him step forward. There was no one else around. No cars, no people rushing past with umbrellas. Just the two of them in the rain, and somehow it felt like the right moment to act. "Hey there," he said softly, lowering his voice to calm tone, keeping his movements slow. The dog froze for a second, then took a tentative step backward. Its ribs were visible under its wet coat, and the shivering made his heart ache. Without thinking too much, he crouched down and slowly extended a hand, palm up. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The dog's ears twitched and it sniffed the air cautiously. The rain dripped from its nose and its eyes seemed to plead silently for help. It took several tense minutes before the dog finally crept forward. He kept talking gently, letting the sound of his voice be as much a reassurance as his presence. When the dog finally nudged his hand with its nose, he carefully lifted it up, feeling its small, trembling body against him. The wet fur soaked his coat, but he didn't care. He had made up his mind. This creature, lost and alone, needed him. He tucked the dog under his arm and made his way home, careful not to slip on the slick pavement. Each step seemed heavier than the last, not because of the dog, but because of the sudden weight of responsibility. He hadn't planned on rescuing anything tonight. He hadn't even planned on feeling so connected to someone, or something that he didn't know. Yet here he was, carrying a tiny, shivering life in his arms, and he felt a strange sense of purpose stirring inside him. Once inside his apartment, he set the dog down gently on a blanket he quickly spread on the floor. The dog sank into it with a sigh, curling up tightly as though trying to soak in the warmth. He ran to the kitchen, filling a bowl with water and another with whatever dog food he had left in the cabinet. The dog sniffed the food cautiously, then began to eat ravenously, pausing only to glance up at him, as if checking whether it was safe to continue. He watched it for a long moment, noticing how fragile it seemed, and felt a pang of sadness mixed with determination. This dog had clearly been abandoned or lost. He had no idea how it had survived alone in the streets for who knows how long, but he couldn't imagine letting it go back out there. Not tonight, not ever. He realized that rescuing this dog wasn't just about saving it from the rain or hunger. It was about offering it safety, comfort, and care, the kind of life it deserved but had never known. The man moved around his small apartment, tidying up a space so the dog could feel more comfortable. He set down towels to dry off the wet paws, made a soft bed with old blankets, and even opened a small window, just enough to let in fresh air without the cold draft. The dog seemed to notice, its tail wagging slightly, though still cautiously. It was as if it understood that this human meant no harm, that perhaps it had finally found someone it could trust. Hours passed quietly. The rain outside continued its steady rhythm, the sound becoming almost hypnotic. The dog finally relaxed, lying down fully on the blankets, its breathing slowing as it drifted toward sleep. The man sat nearby, watching it, feeling an unexpected warmth in his chest. He had always considered himself practical, focused on work and routine, but tonight the simplicity of caring for another being brought a deep, almost overwhelming satisfaction. It was a feeling he hadn't realized he was missing, a connection that filled a quiet space inside him he hadn't noticed was empty. As the night deepened, he thought about what he would do next. He didn't know the dog's name, where it had come from, or whether anyone was looking for it. Maybe no one was. Maybe it had been abandoned completely. And yet in those uncertain moments, he decided that didn't matter. What mattered was here and now the dog was safe, warm, and fed. That was enough for tonight. Tomorrow could bring questions, decisions, and perhaps even challenges, but for the moment, they were both content. Sleep came slowly for him, but he found himself listening to the soft sounds of the dog breathing, feeling a sense of peace that had been foreign for a long time. He imagined the life the dog had lived before, the loneliness it must have felt, the nights it had shivered in the rain with no one to care. It made him feel protective, almost like a parent watching over a child, and he realized how much he had underestimated the power of small acts of kindness. A single decision, to reach out, to offer help, had already changed the course of both their lives, and he hadn't even planned it. By the time he finally drifted into a light sleep, he noticed the dog curled against his leg, a tiny weight of trust and gratitude that seemed to hum quietly in the room. He thought about how strange life could be, how small moments could ripple into something profound without warning. Just a walk home in the rain, just a glance at a struggling creature, and suddenly the world felt bigger, kinder, and more connected. He felt a quiet smile tug at his lips, realizing that rescuing this dog might be the start of something he couldn't yet imagine. The night passed with the rain softening to gentle drizzles, and the man woke to the faint glow of morning. The dog was still by his side, eyes blinking sleepily, tail wagging faintly in recognition. In that simple exchange, he felt a spark of something he had not felt in years. Responsibility mixed with hope, connection mixed with wonder. It was more than caring for a dog. It was the beginning of a story neither of them could yet fully understand. A story that would bring them together in ways neither had expected. As he prepared breakfast for himself and a small portion for the dog, he reflected on the night's events. He realized that rescuing this small, frightened animal was not just an act of kindness. It was a choice to see the world differently, to embrace empathy and compassion even when it required effort, patience, and care. And in that choice he found a subtle, profound joy that lingered long after the first morning light streamed through the window. The dog ate slowly this time, pausing to glance at him now and then, as if acknowledging the bond forming between them. The man felt an unusual sense of calm, knowing that life had a way of guiding you to moments you never expected, but that mattered all the same. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't just existing day to day. He was present, he was needed, and he understood, in a way that words could scarcely capture, that this small, ragged dog had already begun to change his life. He gently patted the dog's head and whispered, "We'll figure this out together." The words felt strange, even miraculous, coming from him. He wasn't usually the kind of person who spoke aloud his thoughts or emotions, but tonight was different. Tonight there was trust. Tonight there was connection. Tonight a small act of rescue had sown the first seed of a story neither of them could yet predict. A story that promised adventure, challenges, and perhaps even love and belonging in ways that stretched far beyond a rainy night and a single act of kindness. And so, with the rain finally easing outside and the first birds beginning to chirp in the quiet morning, the man and the dog sat together in silence. Both felt, in their own way, the fragile but undeniable beginning of a bond that would change everything. Neither knew what the future held, but both understood that this moment, this simple, ordinary, yet extraordinary moment, was the start of something neither would ever forget. The morning after rescuing the dog, the man woke to find it waiting patiently by the door, as if it had already decided what the day should be. It was unusual behavior for a dog, he thought. Most strays, once safe and fed, would curl up somewhere and sleep, but not this one. It nudged at his hand, then turned toward the window and barked softly, its tail wagging in a way that suggested urgency. He hesitated, unsure what it wanted. "You want to go out again?" he asked quietly. The dog barked once more insistently this time, then ran a few steps and stopped, looking back at him. There was a strange intelligence in its eyes, a determination that made him uneasy and curious at the same time. He had no idea what it was trying to show him, but he felt that ignoring it wasn't an option. After quickly putting on a coat, he followed the dog outside. The rain from the previous night had stopped, leaving the streets wet and glistening under the pale morning sun. The air smelled fresh, earthy, and alive. The dog led him through narrow alleys, across empty streets, and toward a small path that edged the nearby forest. He walked carefully, unsure of what he might find, yet strangely compelled to follow. The dog paused at the forest's edge, sniffing the air and looking back at him. It seemed to be asking him to continue. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the path, branches brushing against his coat, fallen leaves damp beneath his feet. The forest was quiet except for the occasional rustle of a bird or a squirrel, but he felt a tension building, like something important was waiting for him deeper in the trees. They walked for what felt like hours, though he knew it could not have been that long. The dog occasionally looked back as if checking that he was still following, and then pressed on. At one point it stopped in front of an old wooden fence, low enough that the dog could easily jump over. Beyond the fence the man could see a small clearing, and in the distance a modest house partially hidden by trees. The dog barked sharply, ran to the gate, and sniffed around, clearly recognizing something familiar. Curiosity mixed with concern, and he approached slowly. He didn't know these people, and he had no idea if they were in danger or simply living quiet, ordinary lives. The dog, however, seemed to know them. It barked again, pacing, and finally ran a short distance toward the house, then stopped and looked back, urging him to follow. He stepped closer to the house and noticed signs of disorder. The garden was overgrown and the front door was slightly ajar. There was an uneasy silence, and a feeling of urgency settled over him. Something was wrong. The dog's behavior confirmed it. This was no ordinary visit. Cautiously, he approached the door and peeked inside. The living room was dim, cluttered, and strangely quiet. A small child sat on the floor holding a worn toy, eyes wide with fear. Across the room, a woman looked anxious, wringing her hands, while a man tried to fix a broken window, his movements rushed and desperate. From the looks on their faces, it was clear that they were dealing with something serious, something the man did not yet understand. The dog ran in first, barking, and the child immediately brightened, rushing toward it.
"Buddy?"
the child shouted, holding the dog close. The man froze, realizing that the dog was not just a random stray. It was their dog, their companion, the one they had clearly been worried about. How it had ended up in the streets in the rain with him was a mystery he couldn't yet solve. The family finally noticed him, eyes wary. "Who are you?" the man asked quietly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. I found him last night in the rain. I didn't know where he belonged." The woman approached cautiously, relief and surprise flickering across her face. "You found him?" she asked, her voice shaking. "He ran away yesterday. We've been searching all night." He nodded, lowering his gaze. "I couldn't leave him out there." He was soaking wet, shivering. "I didn't know what else to do." The man watched as the family's tension eased slightly. The child hugged the dog tightly, and the parents exchanged a glance that spoke volumes: gratitude, relief, and a touch of wonder. The woman invited him inside, and he stepped cautiously over the threshold, feeling an odd mix of curiosity and unease. He still didn't understand what had happened to cause such distress. They explained quickly, in bursts of anxious words, that a recent storm had damaged part of the property, leaving the family somewhat trapped and stressed. The child had wandered outside earlier in the chaos, and the dog had followed, eventually getting lost in the streets. That was where he had come in, unknowingly rescuing both the dog and, indirectly, the family from a night of worry and fear. As he listened, he realized that small decisions could have huge consequences. If he hadn't stopped to help a stray dog the night before, the family might have remained in a state of panic, the child alone and frightened, the dog missing and vulnerable. What had seemed like a simple act of kindness had already changed many lives in ways he hadn't imagined. The dog, now safe and happy in the arms of the child, stayed close to him, occasionally glancing back as if checking that he was still there. There was a quiet bond forming, not just between the man and the dog, but between him and the family as well. He felt a warmth he hadn't known he was capable of feeling for people he had never met. It was strange and beautiful, this connection born from unexpected circumstances. Later, he helped them secure the broken window and clean up the garden a bit. The man of the house explained that they had been struggling to manage everything on their own after the storm, and the woman shared that they had been exhausted, worried constantly about their child and their home. His presence, quiet as it was, made a difference. The dog had been the guide, but his willingness to follow had provided the help the family needed in a crucial moment. After a while, the family invited him to stay for tea. He hesitated but accepted, feeling a mixture of curiosity and cautious comfort. They talked quietly, sharing stories about the dog, the child, and the challenges they had faced recently. He shared little about himself, though the family's warmth slowly coaxed him into opening up. It was an odd, fragile feeling, strangers becoming friends over shared experiences, over trust, and over a small dog that had unknowingly united them. The child, now cheerful and relieved, sat close to him with the dog between them. He realized that his small act of kindness had created ripples far beyond what he had expected. A single decision, to help a lost, shivering animal, had connected him to people he never knew existed, people whose lives he had unknowingly saved from worry and fear. The weight of that realization made him feel both humble and oddly proud, though he wouldn't have admitted pride aloud. By late afternoon, the family insisted he stay until the weather improved. He agreed, feeling a strange sense of belonging, even though he had only just met them. The dog remained close, now resting contentedly in the living room, a living link between the man and the family. They laughed quietly together, the tension of the morning giving way to comfort and gratitude. It was a fragile peace, one born from stormy nights and unexpected encounters, but it felt genuine and strong. Throughout the day, the man noticed small things about the family that endeared them to him even more. The quiet patience of the mother, the father's determination even under stress, and the child's innocence and resilience. Each small observation deepened his connection, and he realized that sometimes the most meaningful bonds were formed in moments of shared challenge and trust. As evening approached, the family finally felt secure. They expressed their gratitude in quiet words, heartfelt gestures, and warm smiles. "You really saved us," the woman said softly. He shook his head, uncomfortable with praise, but the words still lingered in his mind. It was true, in a way. He had saved the dog, yes, but in doing so, he had also eased the fears of an entire family, unknowingly stepping into a role he had never imagined. When he finally left, the dog happily trotting beside him, he looked back at the small house, now calm and safe, and realized that life could be strangely unpredictable. A simple choice to care for a lost, frightened animal had led him to a family he never knew existed, a family whose trust he had earned in a single day. It was a lesson in empathy, courage, and the unexpected ways life could bring people together. As he walked home under a sky turning pink with the setting sun, he felt a quiet joy he hadn't known in years. The dog, once lost and alone, now walked confidently beside him, its tail wagging freely as if proud of the role it had played. Together, they had not only survived the storm but had also created a bond that extended far beyond themselves. And the man knew, deep in his heart, that this was only the beginning. The dog had more to show him, more paths to lead him down, and perhaps more ways to connect him to people whose lives he was destined to touch. He didn't know what the next day would bring, but he felt ready. He had learned that even the smallest acts of care could create ripples larger than he could imagine, that kindness could be a guide, and that sometimes those we save end up saving us in ways we never expect. The bond between him and the dog had deepened, and the bond between him and the family had quietly begun. Life, he realized, had a way of rewarding courage and empathy in the most surprising of ways. And as night fell, the man and the dog returned home, exhausted but content, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and perhaps even new opportunities to help those who needed it most. But for now they rested, connected in a way that went beyond words, ready for whatever the world might have in store. The following morning, the man woke with the dog already pacing near the door. Its tail wagged, but its movements were tense, restless. Something had changed overnight. The dog seemed determined, its eyes sharp and focused, as if it had an urgent message to convey. He rubbed his eyes and sighed. All right, he said softly, standing up. "Where do you want to go now?" The dog barked once and ran a few steps ahead, turning to make sure he followed. They walked through the streets quickly, the dog taking him past familiar corners and down alleys he had never noticed before. Something about the way the dog moved made him feel both uneasy and curious. It wasn't just a stroll. It was purposeful, directed. He noticed the dog occasionally sniffing the air, pausing at certain spots as though it was tracking something invisible. He began to realize that whatever the dog wanted him to see, it was important, and perhaps it had to do with the family he had met the day before. After a while, The path led them back toward the forest near the outskirts of town. The morning light filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. The dog ran ahead, stopping at a fallen tree that partially blocked the path. It barked insistently and pawed at the ground. Curious, he stepped closer and noticed something half buried under wet leaves. A small backpack, torn and muddy with papers spilling out. He picked it up carefully, shaking off the rain-soaked leaves. Inside he found a notebook, a few scattered drawings, and what looked like a list of items. The notebook had scribbled notes about water, food, and repairs, things that indicated someone had been struggling to manage something important, likely the family. His heart quickened. This wasn't just a random lost bag. It belonged to them, and it suggested there was more trouble than he had realized. The dog barked again, as if urging him to continue moving forward. He followed the dog deeper into the forest, and the sounds of the town faded away, replaced by rustling leaves and distant bird calls. The path grew narrower, and at times the undergrowth scratched at his legs, but the dog never wavered. It was as if it knew exactly where to go. Then, at the edge of a small clearing, he saw something that made him stop in his tracks. Smoke curling into the sky from behind a cluster of trees. Something was burning, or someone had started a fire. Cautiously, he approached, keeping low behind the trees. What he saw made his pulse race. The family's home, the one he had visited yesterday, was partially blocked by fallen trees and broken branches. A small fire, likely started from a cooking stove that had tipped over in the chaos of the storm, was spreading near the edge of the house. The family was outside, trying to control it. The man recognized the fear and desperation in their eyes. The child was clinging to the mother, tears streaking the face, while the father tried to beat back the flames with a blanket. Without thinking, he ran forward, the dog bounding ahead as if it were his guide. "Over here," he shouted, catching the father's attention. The father hesitated, surprised to see him, but the urgency in his voice left no room for hesitation. Together they worked to push the blankets over the small flames, beating back the fire before it could spread further. The dog barked loudly, alerting the mother and child to stay at a safe distance, then circled, keeping an eye on everyone. It was chaotic, tense, and exhausting. Every second counted, and the man realized how close disaster had come. Had he not arrived, the fire could have spread rapidly, endangering the family and their home. He could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins, mixing with fear and determination. This wasn't about rescuing a dog anymore. It was about saving lives. And somehow he knew he was meant to be here, in this moment, doing exactly what he could. After several tense minutes, the flames were finally under control. Smoke still curled from the scorched ground, but the house was safe and the family was unharmed. The man leaned against a tree, catching his breath, and the dog sat at his feet, panting lightly but clearly satisfied. The father clapped him on the shoulder, gratitude evident in his eyes. "We don't know what we would have done without you," he said, voice heavy with relief. The mother nodded, tears still wet on her cheeks, and the child hugged the dog tightly, whispering, "Thank you for bringing him back to us." The man shook his head, trying to deflect the praise. "It wasn't just me," he said quietly. "This dog, he led me here. He knew what to do." The dog wagged its tail, seemingly aware of the recognition, and nuzzled the man's leg. There was a quiet bond forming between all of them, one built on trust, courage, and the shared experience of narrowly avoiding disaster. Once the immediate danger had passed, they worked together to clean up the mess. Fallen branches were moved, debris cleared, and the scorched area was doused with water from buckets. The man noticed how exhausted the family was, how thin the line had been between safety and catastrophe. He felt a deep sense of connection, a realization that his small act of kindness the night before had led to something far bigger than he could have imagined. Rescuing the dog hadn't just saved the animal. It had positioned him to help a family in a moment of real crisis. As the afternoon sun began to break through the clouds, the man finally sat down on a log nearby, watching the family regroup. The mother checked the child for cuts or scrapes, while the father assessed the damage to the house. The dog lay next to him, ears alert but body relaxed. He felt an unusual mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. He had never considered himself a hero, but today he realized that courage didn't always look like a grand gesture. Sometimes it was as simple as following a dog through the forest, trusting instinct and acting when needed. The family invited him to stay for the evening, insisting he eat with them and rest before heading home. He agreed. though he remained quietly aware of the strange circumstances that had led him here. He thought about the chain of events, the rain, the lost dog, the fire, and his own willingness to help, and marveled at how unpredictable life could be. Small choices, small acts of empathy, could create ripples far beyond what anyone could foresee. Over dinner, they shared stories and laughter, though the memory of the morning's events lingered. The father spoke quietly about the challenges of rebuilding after the storm. The mother shared her worries about keeping the child safe, and the child chattered happily about the dog, who sat loyally at his side. The man listened, offering advice and assistance where he could. But mostly he just absorbed the warmth of the family, feeling a sense of belonging he hadn't realized he was missing. As the evening drew on, the man noticed something else, small signs of resilience and courage in the family. Despite everything that had happened, they remained connected, determined, and loving. They had faced real danger and stress, yet their bond was unbroken. He felt honored to witness it, to be a part of it even in a small way. And he realized that sometimes, life demanded ordinary people to step into extraordinary roles, whether they expected it or not. Later, when the family finally prepared to rest, the man helped them secure the house for the night. He stayed a little longer, making sure the dog had water and that the child felt safe and calm. The mother placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "We don't even know how to thank you," she said softly. He smiled, feeling the words weigh heavily with meaning. "You don't need to," he replied. "I'm glad I was here. That's enough for me." Once he left, walking back through the quiet streets, the man reflected on the day's events. He realized that the dog had not only guided him to a family in need, but had also taught him something important about intuition, trust, and action. Life often presented opportunities in ways that seemed random or coincidental, but sometimes those moments were anything but. They were chances to make a difference, even when it required courage and uncertainty. By the time he returned home, the dog had already settled comfortably in its new space, as if the day's adventures had confirmed its place in the man's life. He patted the dog gently, feeling the warmth of its fur and the loyalty in its eyes. "We did good today," he said quietly, more to himself than to the dog. The dog nudged his hand in agreement, tail wagging faintly, and he smiled. That night, as he lay in bed, he thought about the family, the fire, and the strange, unpredictable path that had led him here. He had always considered his life quiet, ordinary, and manageable, but today had shown him how quickly things could change, how suddenly one small act could ripple outward and affect many lives. He realized that courage wasn't about grand gestures or recognition. It was about stepping forward when needed, trusting intuition, and following the small signs life offered, even if those signs came in the form of a lost, frightened dog. And as sleep slowly claimed him, he felt a quiet anticipation for what lay ahead. The dog had led him to this moment, and he sensed that the journey wasn't over. There were still challenges, still lessons to learn, and perhaps still lives to touch in ways he could not yet see. But for now, he allowed himself to rest, content in the knowledge that he had acted when it mattered most, guided by kindness, instinct, and an unexpected companion who had changed his life forever. The next morning, the man awoke to the dog nudging him insistently, tail wagging but eyes serious, almost anxious. Something had changed overnight. The air felt heavy, charged with tension, though he didn't yet know why. The dog barked once sharply, then ran toward the door, stopping to look back as if demanding he follow. He groaned, sitting up and rubbing his face. All right, he muttered. "Let's see what's going on." Outside, the streets were quiet, the sky overcast but calm, a strange contrast to the sense of urgency pressing against him. The dog led him back toward the forest near the outskirts of town. The man followed closely, careful not to lose sight of his companion. Every step felt weighted, as if the forest itself held its breath. The dog moved with purpose, sniffing and listening, sometimes stopping to bark sharply at something unseen. The man's heart beat faster. He knew instinctively that this wasn't just a walk. It was something important, something urgent. After winding through the familiar path, they emerged into the clearing near the family's home. But what he saw made him stop cold. The small river that ran beside the property had overflowed from recent rains. Water surged over the banks, rising quickly toward the house. The child's small treehouse, which had been safe yesterday, was now partially submerged. The father was out trying to secure belongings, struggling against the current while the mother clutched the child tightly, fear etched across her face. The family's home was at real risk of flooding, and the man knew they could not handle this alone. Without hesitation, he ran forward. The dog bounded ahead, barking and running circles around the father, urging him to focus on the most immediate danger. The man grabbed a rope the father had been struggling with and tied it to a sturdy tree, creating a makeshift lifeline. "Hold on," he shouted, gripping the rope and motioning for the father to secure himself. The water surged closer, icy and fast-moving. But the father braced himself, trusting the man's calm instructions. The man waded into the water carefully, feeling the strong current push against his legs. Every step was a struggle, but the dog stayed near the riverbank, barking encouragement, staying alert, and even jumping in occasionally to help guide the father. The child cried from the safety of the mother's arms, but the dog ran back and forth between them and the father, its presence offering reassurance. The man felt a mix of fear and determination. This wasn't a simple rescue, it was life or death, and he couldn't afford hesitation. Finally, after several tense minutes, he and the father managed to secure the heavier items from the floodwaters, pulling them toward higher ground. The dog barked triumphantly each time an object was saved, circling and wagging its tail as if celebrating small victories. The man noticed how coordinated the dog's actions were, almost as if it had a clear plan in mind. Without this animal's intelligence and guidance, he realized, the situation could have turned disastrous. But the challenge was far from over. A particularly large wave surged toward the house, threatening to sweep away the child's small belongings and make the flooding worse. The man yelled for the father to hold tight while he ran toward the roofed porch, trying to secure the child's small toys and furniture. The dog followed closely, barking warningly at every threatening ripple. He worked quickly, moving items to safer ground while the water splashed around his legs, cold and relentless. The tension was unbearable, but giving up was not an option. The mother clutched the child closer as the man returned, dripping wet but determined. "We're going to get through this," he said firmly, more to calm himself than anyone else. The father nodded, exhaustion visible on his face but trust clear in his eyes. Together they formed a small chain of action, coordinated by instinct, courage, and the dog's remarkable presence. The child watched with wide eyes, gripping the dog's fur as if drawing strength from it. Suddenly, a louder roar of rushing water caught everyone's attention. A large section of the riverbank had given way upstream, sending a surge racing toward them faster than before. The man's heart leapt. "Get to higher ground," he shouted. The family moved quickly, the dog leading the way, barking and nudging them toward safety. The child clung to the dog, the little creature supporting and guiding them as if it had been born for this exact moment. They climbed a slight hill behind the house, where the ground was solid and dry. The man helped the father pull heavy objects up while the mother held the child close. The dog stayed near the water, alert and protective, circling and barking at any threatening movement. The floodwaters roared below, sweeping away fences, fallen branches, and debris, but everyone on the hill was safe, for now. The man took a deep breath, surveying the chaos below. The family's home was partially flooded and their belongings were scattered, but their lives were intact. He felt a rush of relief, though his mind stayed alert, knowing that rescue was not finished until they were completely safe. The dog barked sharply, racing toward the edge of the hill, then back to him. He understood the cue. There was someone else at risk. He followed the dog to a small shed near the back of the property. Inside, he found an elderly neighbor trapped behind debris, unable to climb out as the water rose. Without hesitation, he pushed and lifted, moving the fallen boards and helping the neighbor to higher ground. The neighbor was trembling, frightened, and grateful, clutching his hands to the man's shoulders. "I didn't think anyone would see me," he whispered. The man patted his arm, wet and exhausted. "You're safe now. Let's get you to the family." The dog ran ahead, circling, barking, and urging them onward. Together, the man, the family, and the neighbor made it to the safest spot on the hill. The child clung to the dog's fur, eyes wide, still trembling but safe. The mother wrapped a blanket around everyone, while the father clutched the child tightly. The man looked at the water raging below, realizing how close disaster had come. He felt a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and awe. For a moment, they all just breathed, listening to the roar of the river and the dog's soft panting. The child finally spoke, small voice trembling but excited. "He saved us," the child said, hugging the dog. The mother nodded, tears in her eyes, and the father finally allowed himself a shaky smile. "We wouldn't have made it without you," he said to the man, voice heavy with gratitude. The man shook his head. "No," he replied quietly, "we did it together. This dog." He knew what to do. As the water slowly began to recede, the family worked with him to salvage what they could from the house and property. The dog remained alert, occasionally barking at floating debris or guiding the child safely along the edge of the hill. The man noticed how extraordinary the dog's instincts were, how it seemed to understand danger and safety in a way that went beyond simple training or intuition. It had saved more than a life. It had orchestrated the entire rescue with intelligence and loyalty. By late afternoon, the floodwaters had receded enough for them to begin moving back into the house. The man helped carry wet belongings and secure the property as best as possible, though much was damaged. The family was exhausted but alive, safe, and together. The child ran to the dog repeatedly, hugging it and whispering words of thanks, and the man felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. They had survived together, guided by courage, teamwork, and a remarkable animal who had brought them all to safety. Finally, when the house was as secure as it could be and everyone had something dry to wear, the man sat with the family, drenched, tired, and muddy. "I don't even know what to say," the mother said softly, looking at him with gratitude and awe. He smiled faintly, shrugging. "You don't have to say anything. You're safe. That's enough." The father nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll never forget this," he said. The child curled up next to the dog, now calm and content, while the parents quietly began to clean up and assess the damage. The man watched them, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction and humility. He had never imagined that rescuing a lost, frightened dog would lead to this. An entire family saved from danger, a child kept safe, and lives preserved from disaster. As night fell, the man finally left, exhausted but filled with a quiet sense of purpose. The dog trotted happily beside him, wagging its tail as if proud of the day's events. He thought about how unpredictable life could be, how a single act of kindness could ripple outward to touch many lives, and how sometimes courage wasn't about grand gestures. It was about listening, acting, and trusting instincts. He glanced back at the house, now quiet but safe, and felt a warmth in his chest he couldn't fully describe. The family had survived, the child was safe, and the dog, the very creature he had rescued days ago, had been the key to it all. He knew their lives were forever changed, and in a small but profound way his own had been transformed as well. That night, as he finally settled into his bed, he thought about the day's events. Fear, urgency, and adrenaline had dominated the hours, but so had hope, teamwork, and trust. He realized that small acts of compassion could create extraordinary consequences, that courage often came in quiet, unexpected forms, and that sometimes life's greatest teachers were the ones you least expected. A lost, frightened dog leading him to heroism. He patted the dog gently, who curled up beside him, safe and content. "We did it," he whispered, feeling the truth in the words. They had faced danger, guided by instinct and kindness, and come through stronger, connected, and alive. And though he didn't know what the future would bring, he knew one thing clearly. Life could change in a single moment, and sometimes those moments were the most extraordinary of all. The days after the flood were quieter, but the man felt a strange sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in years. The storm had passed, the house had been repaired as best as possible, and the family had returned to a routine that felt both ordinary and fragile. Yet he knew that what had happened would linger in their hearts forever. The fear, the relief, and the gratitude all woven together like threads in a tapestry that marked a moment none of them would forget. The dog had settled completely into his home now, but its presence was more than comforting. It was a constant reminder of how small actions could ripple outward and change lives. He watched the dog sleep on its favorite blanket in the corner of his living room, sunlight streaming through the window, and thought about the first night he had rescued it from the rain. At that moment, he had no idea what impact that single decision would have. Now it was clear that life often sent guidance in unexpected forms. He visited the family almost every day, often bringing supplies, helping repair the garden, or simply sitting and sharing stories. Each visit reminded him of how fragile life could be, and how crucial simple human kindness was. He noticed small changes in himself too. He had become more patient, more attentive to others, more willing to step forward when needed. He had always thought of himself as ordinary, but he realized that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences when they chose to act. The child had grown especially attached to the dog, calling it a hero and following it around with wide-eyed enthusiasm. The man often watched them play together, laughing softly at the child's joy and the dog's tireless energy. The child's laughter was a sound that seemed to fill every corner of his heart, reminding him of the deep impact of care and connection. It was humbling, this simple bond forming between three lives that had collided in an unexpected way. One afternoon, while helping the father repair a broken fence, he noticed the mother watching quietly from the porch. She smiled and waved, holding a basket of freshly picked vegetables. "You should rest," she called out. "We've managed most of it ourselves." He shook his head, smiling back. "I'm fine," he replied, though he allowed himself a moment to sit on the porch steps, catching his breath. The dog lay at his feet, ears alert, watching everything with its usual mix of energy and attentiveness. As he sat there, he thought about the chain of events that had brought him to this moment. The rain, the lonely streets, the night of rescue, and the flood. It was almost unbelievable that such chaos had led to something so profoundly meaningful. The dog had not only saved the family but had also shown him the depth of empathy and courage that humans were capable of. Life, he realized, often rewarded those who acted with compassion, even when the path was uncertain. The family invited him to share meals with them now, not out of necessity but out of genuine affection. He found himself enjoying the simple routines, breakfast together in the morning sunlight, helping the child with schoolwork, or sitting quietly in the evening, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. Every day he felt a little more connected, a little more alive. He had always lived quietly, almost in isolation, but now his life was filled with laughter, responsibility, and a sense of purpose he had never imagined. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold, he sat with the child and the dog by the river. The water had receded completely, leaving the banks calm and gentle. The child threw sticks for the dog to fetch, laughing each time it raced back with a wagging tail and triumphant bark. The man watched quietly, a warm smile tugging at his lips. This was a moment of peace, a rare and precious one, and he felt grateful to be part of it. The mother approached carrying a small basket of fruit. She offered him a piece of apple, and he took it with a quiet nod of thanks. "We owe you so much," she said softly, eyes glistening. He shook his head again. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what I could. I'm glad everyone's safe." Still, he felt the weight of their gratitude. It was a reminder that even small actions could mean the world to someone else. That one decision to help a lost dog had created a ripple effect that extended far beyond him. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, life regained a sense of rhythm. The child returned to school, the family's home was repaired, and the garden began to flourish again. The dog remained an integral part of both his life and theirs, bridging the gap between two households now connected in ways neither could have predicted. He noticed how the child would excitedly run to the dog whenever he arrived, and how the dog in turn would respond with uncontainable joy. It was a bond that spoke without words, a connection born of trust, courage, and shared experience. He often thought about the nights spent in the rain, the first moments when the dog had timidly accepted his care, and the moments of fear and urgency during the flood. Each memory reminded him of the fragility of life and the importance of paying attention, of noticing small signs, and of acting without hesitation. Courage, he realized, wasn't always loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and often invisible to the world. It was in showing up, in making a choice to help, and in trusting your instincts when they guided you to those in need. One weekend, the family invited him to stay for a small celebration, a picnic in the backyard to mark the return to normalcy. The air was filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and the warmth of the late afternoon sun. The child ran around, playing with the dog, laughing and shouting with joy. The parents smiled and helped with food, occasionally glancing at him with genuine appreciation. He felt a deep sense of belonging, something he hadn't known he needed. This family, once strangers, had become a part of his life, and he realized how much richer it had become because of it. As the day drew to a close, they all sat quietly, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The dog lay between them, head resting on the man's lap, eyes half closed but alert. The child leaned against him, tired but happy, and the parents watched with gentle smiles. In that quiet moment, he understood the true meaning of connection and community. Life was unpredictable, fragile, and sometimes frightening, but it was also beautiful, full of opportunities to help, love, and be part of something larger than oneself. The man reflected on his own life, realizing how much it had changed in a short period. He had always thought of himself as ordinary, living a routine life with few surprises. Yet the events of the past weeks had shown him that ordinary people could rise to extraordinary circumstances. Courage, empathy, and a willingness to act had created bonds that would last a lifetime. And at the center of it all had been a dog, a small, frightened creature that had led him into a story he would never forget. He looked at the family, at their smiles, at the way they laughed and shared small gestures of love, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had rescued the dog, yes, but in doing so he had been drawn into something far larger, a connection, a community, and a story of survival, care, and trust. It was a lesson he would carry forever, that small acts of kindness could change the course of lives in ways one could never fully predict. The dog stirred, lifting its head to nuzzle him gently. He smiled, scratching behind its ears. "We did it," he whispered, thinking not just of the rescue but of everything that had followed. Together they had faced fear, uncertainty, and danger. Together they had saved a family and discovered the depth of courage and empathy within themselves. And together they had created bonds that would endure far beyond the storms, floods, and uncertainties of life. As night fell, the man returned home, the dog by his side, feeling a calm contentment he hadn't known in years. He thought about how unpredictable life could be, how a single act, rescuing a lost dog in the rain, had led to friendships, trust, and moments of heroism. It was a reminder that life often worked in mysterious ways, guiding people toward moments of purpose and meaning when they least expected it. He sat quietly, watching the dog curl up on its blanket, breathing slowly and peacefully. He realized that this was more than just saving a dog or a family. It was about understanding the power of kindness, the importance of empathy, and the way courage could quietly shape lives. The events of the past weeks had transformed him, teaching him that even ordinary people could be extraordinary when they acted with heart, awareness, and compassion. The family's story had become intertwined with his own, and he understood that life's challenges often revealed who we truly were. The dog, once frightened and alone, had become a hero, a guide, and a bridge between lives. The child's laughter, the parents' gratitude, and the small moments of daily connection had created a sense of purpose that filled his days with meaning he hadn't known he needed. And so, the man and the dog settled into their quiet home that night, the dog at his side and the world outside peaceful for the first time in weeks. He reflected on the journey, the storm, the rain, the flood, the fear, and the courage, and felt a deep, steady sense of fulfillment. Life was unpredictable, yes, but it was also full of opportunities to care, to act, and to connect. And sometimes the smallest acts, like rescuing a lost dog, could lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. In the following weeks, he continued to visit the family, helping when needed, sharing in their joy, and watching the child grow more confident and happy each day. The dog became a beloved part of both their lives and his own, a living symbol of courage, loyalty, and the unexpected ways life could connect people. Together they had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, and together they had emerged stronger, bonded, and forever changed. One evening, as he watched the sunset from his porch with the dog resting beside him, he realized that life had given him a gift far greater than he could have imagined. A family, a friend, a companion, and a story that would stay with him forever. It was a reminder that kindness, courage, and compassion could create ripples that